this kind of combination of embracing radical curiosity, which is my way of saying kind of having the courage to look at the things that might be painful for you in your life, which for me in this case was the devastating pain of losing my fiance. And then the second stage of that is I kind of think about it as like the art of surrender.
This is the Maverick Show, where you'll meet today's most interesting real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and world travelers, and learn the strategies and tactics they use to succeed. And now, here's your host, Matt Bowles.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Bowles. Welcome to the Maverick Show. My guest today is Johnny Miller. He has been a startup mentor to over 250 early stage founders around the world. He is also a growth marketer, TEDx speaker, author, emotional resilience coach, and world traveler. Johnny is also the host of the Curious Humans podcast. After losing his fiancée to suicide, Johnny delivered a powerful TEDx talk in 2019 entitled The Gifts of Grief, where he shares his grieving process and his profound reflections on death, mental health, and radical curiosity about grief and its impact. In 2012, Johnny co-founded MapDia, whose mission is to foster empathy through storytelling by providing a platform for travelers, writers, and photographers to document and capture the world around us and create a living archive of inspiring and impactful stories from around the globe. Johnny's writing on global innovation has been featured in Forbes, the Huffington Post, and many other publications. But Johnny is disproportionately proud of once crossing the English Channel on an inflatable stand-up paddleboard. Johnny, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Matt. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you here, man. I am so impressed and inspired by so many things that you're doing. Just to set the context here, first of all, we're not actually in person doing this interview today. If we were, I'd offer to buy you a bottle of wine. We're actually doing this remotely. I'm actually in Dubai recording this. And where are you today?
I'm currently in Canggu in Bali, where it has just started raining. The heavens have opened outside. So if you hear some background noise, that's the rain.
Well, you and I actually met through a number of our shared friends who Maverick Show listeners will know because a number of them have been on the podcast, including Danielle Thompson, Ella Cook, Arthur Worsley, Aaron Young. And you're just part of a really, really special crew of people that mean a lot to both of us in Bali. And you and I have been trying to put this interview together for a while. So super, super excited we're finally able to make it happen. And awesome to have you here today, man.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
I'd love for you to just start off talking a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and what your journey's been like that ultimately brought you to Bali.
I guess when I first came here to Bali just over 10 years ago, I took a year out between school and university to do some travel, and ended up here in Bali where I learned to surf and kind of fell in love with the island. It was one of the most amazing places that I traveled to. And then I went back for university in the UK, up in Durham, where I studied philosophy and economics. And I think that's kind of where the seeds of everything that followed were really planted. I started a travel magazine with two really close friends, which we then graduated. And I think all of us realized that we didn't want to get jobs in the city. And we kind of seen enough people kind of almost like lose their soul after a few years of working there. So we went traveling, and Dorothy and Dean, my two then co-founders, discovered this startup accelerator program called Startup Chile, which was based in Santiago. And it's a government-run accelerator program where the government give foreign entrepreneurs $40,000 to fly to Chile and start a business. So we thought this sounds too good to be true. and we applied for this program. We kind of filled our application full of like business buzzwords. We really didn't know what we were talking about at the time. My co-founder Dean thought startups were something to do with engines or cars. We were really incredibly naive at the time. But that accelerator program was really where we surrounded ourselves with there were over 200 other entrepreneurs from, I think, 65 different countries around the world. And I think we just kind of sought out to be sponges, really, and, learn as much as we could from these other much more experienced founders. And I kind of lent into the marketing and business development side of things. Dorothy, my co-founder, picked up design, and Dean became a full stack developer. And kind of with these newfound skills, we were able to build a prototype, which we're then able to use to get into Techstars, which is another startup accelerator based in Seattle. And they gave us some investment, and this kind of kickstarted a nomadic startup adventure that led us to 5 continents. We lived and worked in Morocco for a year. We came to Bali for a bit. Yeah, it's been a wild journey.
Well, I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal entrepreneurial journey in founding and building MapDia.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So I think for us, getting into Techstars was a really big kind of step forward. We felt very, I think we kind of had imposter syndrome because we felt like we were young and not particularly experienced. And we were in this program alongside people who'd been at Apple and Google and Amazon and these really experienced people. And I think because of that, we almost set out to please a lot of the mentors that we were given there. And these were really smart people. But I think we fell into the trap of just trying to tick these boxes and we almost got mental whiplash, where I think we lost sight of our kind of original connection to the vision and why we wanted to start MapDia. And we felt like we were just flailing in lots of different directions and working crazy hours, to be honest, like 7 days a week, not really taking care of ourselves. And although we were busy the whole time, we didn't really achieve that much during the program, which is through no fault of Techstars. It's a wonderful program, but it was just the approach that we took. So when the program finished, we called it a Techstars hangover, where for 2 weeks we were useless. We just slept and needed to recover. But following that, our visas expired from the States, so we had to leave the US anyway. And we made the decision to spin the globe and find somewhere that would allow us to build MapDia, our startup, in a slower and more sustainable way, and extending our runway much further than if we lived somewhere in a big city. So we moved to Tagazout, which is a little fishing village in Morocco, where I once worked as a surf instructor. And we ended up living there for 11 months. And that was one of the best business decisions that we made, because we were able to really slow down and to build more intentionally and reconnect with the reasons that we started MapDia in the first place, which was from a love of travel and a passion for long-form storytelling and photography. So the platform launched out in Morocco, and we then moved to Switzerland and then Bali. And we've written a post called 10 Lessons Learned from the First 1,000 Days of Building MapDia. And I think a lot of those lessons were around persistence and tenacity and building more deliberately, as opposed to kind of getting caught up in the very intoxicating rush of the startup echo chamber, which I would imagine a few listeners are familiar with.
Well, I know at this point in your journey, you have now mentored over 250 startup founders. And I would love to ask you to share just sort of any common themes or overlapping or recurring struggles or challenges or hurdles that you see startup founders having, or you think startup founders should be paying attention to, and any tips you have about overcoming those?
Yeah, good question. So for context, I moved on from my role at MapDia about 5 years ago and joined a company in London called Escape the City, where I designed and led their startup tribe program, which was a 12-week accelerator for early stage entrepreneurs to basically go from having an idea in their head to putting that idea out in the world, and kind of going through the prototyping, marketing, fundraising, all of those steps. And in terms of advice and lessons from mentoring, I think that one of the biggest lessons for me, to be honest, was actually to step back a little bit and give less advice and learn how to ask better questions. I think that often it can be easy to kind of feel like you need to give value, or you need to deliver content and deliver insights. But I think that for the majority of the founders that I've spoken to, they often already know the answers, and they have a fairly good sense of, at least deep down, what their next step should be. But it's often helping them to get clear on that and almost giving them permission slips to follow their own intuition. That's kind of one of the biggest themes. And then I think that a lot of the blockers and a lot of the resistance usually stems down to fear of some sort. And that could show up as imposter syndrome. It could show up as a kind of scarcity mindset in terms of feeling like they haven't got enough money or resources or connections or whatever that looks like. And so it's really just working through that and giving them support as well. I think a lot of founders fall into the trap of thinking that they have to go through everything on their own, and that asking for help somehow makes them weak. And so actually kind of helping them to receive the support that is almost always out there when they're able to ask for it.
Can you also talk about the concept of emotional resilience? I think as an entrepreneur myself, one of the biggest challenges of my journey has been this entrepreneurial roller coaster that goes up and it goes down. And, a lot of people talk about time and the importance of, optimizing the use of your time and all this other kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've been, reflecting on over the years is just, the importance of your emotional state and how much, entrepreneurship takes out of you, not just in terms of your time, but in terms of your emotional energy. And I know that that's one of the things that you've really been focused on lately. And I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about emotional resilience in general. What is it? What types of reflections have you had on it? And how are you working with entrepreneurs on that at the moment?
Yeah, so this topic is really alive for me right now. I've actually just finished kind of designing and prototyping the content for some day-long masterclasses. So I have a lot of ideas and thoughts around this. And I think that, I suppose as a starting point, it's been helpful for me to actually split the topic of emotional resiliency into 3 different areas. And those different areas are recovery strategies. So that might be something like getting good sleep, eating nourishing food, meditation, that sort of thing. Capacity increasing strategies, and that's things that enable you to kind of thrive in situations that have a higher emotional intensity, and basically be able to take more highs and lows on that roller coaster without being knocked off. And then the third piece, which is I think really overlooked by the majority of humans, let alone founders, is the resiliency piece. And that for me is the journey of processing potentially traumatic or intense events. And for me, the journey for that, or for kind of really living this process, has been the journey of grief for the last 2 years. And it's obviously outside of the kind of the entrepreneurial sphere, but for me, the lesson was really learning how to kind of be weak enough to kind of investigate the pain that was inside, and the pain that I had kind of learned not to feel throughout much of my upbringing in the UK, where a lot of us are kind of emotionally repressed, I'd say. And I think particularly as startup founders, we spend a lot of time in our heads, and we have this very kind of analytical approach, and we're really disconnected from our bodies and from our feelings. And so it often takes a lot for our heads and our minds to pay attention to whatever our body's going through. And so I think the first step is really developing a kind of somatic awareness and just a sense of like, how am I feeling in this moment? Like what is coming up for me? What is going on? And learning to listen to our body's feedback, often in the form of emotions, and processing that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, your TED Talk was incredibly profound, your TEDx talk that you did in Bali, and we're going to link that up in the show notes. I want people to go and watch that for a number of reasons. I mean, it's not something that you can just summarize, because your language that you used in that TED Talks was so poetically masterful and powerful. I feel like the entire TEDx talk itself is just a piece of art that I want people to go and listen to, because of just how incredibly powerful it is. But I would love for you to share a little bit of the context and, the reflections that have come out of that process that you went through. It was obviously a massive life-altering thing, of course. And so anything that you can share for the listeners in terms of the context of what you went through and how you navigated it and what your reflections are at this point in your life.
Well, thank you for the kind words. That really means a lot. I think that the themes of the talk were this kind of combination of embracing radical curiosity, which is my way of saying kind of having the courage to look at the things that might be painful for you in your life, which for me in this case was the devastating pain of losing my fiance. And then the second stage of that is, I kind of think about it as like the art of surrender. And that for me was the kind of 2-year-long journey of putting myself into situations that initially I was kind of drawn to the people and places that were imbued with a sense of Sophie, who was my partner. And it was actually through the process of swimming in the sea in Brighton, which is where we used to live. And this was in kind of October, November time when the water was 6 or 7 degrees. And there's something about stepping into freezing cold water and the kind of the shock and the pain that comes with that, and learning to almost sink into that and let the cold seep into your bones and not resisting it. And from that place, the pain kind of dissolves and the pain kind of goes away. And yeah, I was able to swim for 20 minutes to half an hour. And for me, that's a really wonderful metaphor for the process of navigating grief, but also navigating any kind of painful experience or some kind of shameful feeling that might be hard to kind of sink into. And after a few months there, I spent 10 days on a silent Vipassana meditation retreat, which again was kind of this process of learning to surrender to the endless stream of thoughts that comes up, and again kind of sinking into some of those places that or some of those feelings that only arise when we're able to get still. And I then took that into freediving, which is now my kind of new favorite hobby. I'm going to head up to do some more next weekend, but that for me is it's like underwater meditation. And again, the lesson is you kind of inquire into your body as to like, where am I tense? Where am I feeling stuck? And you then equalize and you then sink maybe 2 or 3 meters deeper. And then you repeat the process. You say, okay, maybe my stomach is tense. I need to relax my belly. And then you're able to equalize and you fall deeper and deeper and the pressure gets more and more intense. And it's this like real-time feedback of how relaxed are you? How surrendered into this experience are you? I think kind of looking back on the 2 years, it's really been that ongoing journey into curiosity and into embracing surrender.
You are also the host of the Curious Humans podcast. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about this concept of radical curiosity. What does it mean to be a curious human, and why is that important?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah. So where did this begin? I think this started from something that I would imagine a lot of entrepreneurs can listen to, which is having too many ideas and too many interests, but not really enough time to kind of follow all of these different things. And I began this podcast project as an experiment to turn the lens of curiosity back on itself. I think I became really fascinated by curiosity, and particularly the question of why we tend to take it seriously as adults. It's something that is kind of encouraged in children, but as soon as you get to a certain age, it's kind of lost. And I was really interested in why do we lose it, and how do people reclaim it in their adult lives. And during some of my conversations with curiosity researchers and authors, there's been some really interesting insights that have surfaced. For example, there's really powerful connections between curiosity and creativity, and some researchers citing curiosity as the antidote to depression, and that it's impossible to be angry or depressed and curious at the same time. And I think that for me, it's also been a kind of a medium for my own lifelong learning and kind of experimentation. And as I'm sure the case is true for you, starting a podcast is a really great way to connect with interesting people and have really deep dive, intimate conversations with people that you wouldn't otherwise normally get a chance to talk to. And the theme has kind of been evolving from this idea of just investigating curiosity itself to this idea of radical curiosity, and how do we have the courage to look at some of the harder aspects of life that we tend to habitually avoid or numb in order to kind of avoid feeling. So that's kind of been the evolution of the journey, but it's honestly been one of the most rewarding projects that I've ever started. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, but I feel like learning to ask good questions is also kind of an art in itself as well. And also knowing when to deviate away from the kind of scripted questions that you have and to follow the flow of a conversation into wherever it wants to lead. And I think that is kind of an art in itself.
100%. Yeah. Which is how 30-minute podcast of mine turns into 2 hours real quick.
Amazing.
As my listeners well know. I would love for you to just also, share some reflections in terms of the guests that you have had on your podcast up to this point. I'd love for you to just share, for example, some of the types of guests that have been on your show, some of the types of topics that you've discussed. And I would love to hear, of all of the people that you've interviewed so far, what are some of your most powerful takeaways that you've learned from your guests?
It's like trying to choose between children, right? Like, how do you how do you decide? What comes up for me? I was really blessed. Last summer, I spent a week on the west coast of Ireland with a philosopher poet called David Whyte. We sat in this cottage in Ballyvaughan by a fireside, drinking whiskey, and it was one of those conversations where you just kind of pinch yourself. He speaks with such reverence and kind of deep attention that I almost felt transfixed, and it was really hard to maintain eye contact as well during the conversation, I remember. But we talked about courage as a measure of heartfelt participation with life, and he has these wonderful definitions of words that he's written in this book called Consolations. And I'd say with that conversation, it was less about kind of specific takeaways and more just about the feeling and the felt experience of being there and listening to the kind of poetic quality of his voice. So if any listeners kind of want something to fall asleep to, he has a beautiful kind of Irish transatlantic accent. So that was a really powerful conversation for me. Other episodes that I've really enjoyed, I talked to a curiosity researcher called Anna Starkey, who basically helps to kind of describe the literature behind curiosity and how there's diversive curiosity versus epistemic curiosity, for example. So diversive curiosity is where we get interested in lots of kind of shiny objects. It's like a social media feed or like being pulled in lots of different directions, as opposed to epistemic curiosity, which is taking a question and really diving deep, like drilling deep and following the question with a passion. So that was really interesting for me. I spoke to a 12-year-old conscious fashion entrepreneur called Hanley who lives here in Canggu recently. And that was very humbling for me as well, like meeting someone who is 12 years old and, more articulate than certainly I was and probably am. And just seeing her confidence and seeing what she's been capable of achieving with the permission slips and the support from her parents is really inspiring. And then finally, I also really enjoyed a conversation with this guy, Kevin Hainline, who is a NASA astronomer. And his curiosity for the night sky and his just voracious intellectual interest in seemingly everything was just a real joy to be around. And it was one of those conversations where I maybe say like 4 or 5 words in the whole conversation, and he just goes off in these amazing lyrical rants, I guess. And one of the things that stands out, just thinking back to it, was he talked about how constellations in the night sky are different in tribes and cultures all around the world, and how you can interpret, or you can kind of gain insights into the culture from the types of stories that they tell from the constellations up in the night sky. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And yeah, he just inspired me to care more about the night sky.
Amazing. Well, we're definitely going to link up your podcast in the show notes so folks can go check that out. Everything we talk about in this episode is going to be in one place at themaverickshow.com. Let me ask you one more podcasting question, which is, you mentioned at the beginning about developing skills as a podcast host and as the person who's asking the questions. And I'm wondering, just with all of the interviews that you've done now and all the experience that you have, what reflections or tips or lessons do you have? You and I obviously are both, striving daily to become better at our craft of podcasting, of course. But at this point, what for you makes a great interview, lessons about being a better interviewer and just creating great podcast episodes? I'd love to know that. And we have other podcasters as well that listen to the show. So I'd love to hear your reflections at this point in your journey.
I would say that for me, it's been learning to be alive to what is kind of coming through from the other person in that moment. And I think also there's something around creating a sense of vulnerability, kind of connection, as early on as possible in the conversation that allows guests to kind of free themselves and to be curious as to what it is that they're feeling in the moment, as opposed to the more pre-scripted answers that they might have given on previous podcasts or shows, or just that default response, and how to ask questions which almost act as pattern interrupts and get them to lower down their guards and to think about something for the first time, or perhaps to elicit a story that they might have thought about for a while. So one question that I like to ask is, what was someone's favorite book growing up as a child? And I kind of have this theory that the narratives and stories that resonate with us when we're growing up contain clues to our life's purpose. And so that's been kind of an interesting question to open up with. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I think there's lots of, I'm a complete podcast addict, and I listen to so many podcasts, and I love the diversity. I think there's lots of ways to do this. But for me, it really comes down to good stories and to being alive to what wants to kind of come through in that moment, and letting go of the ideas of the questions you wanted to ask before hitting record.
That's really awesome insight, I think. Speaking of really good stories, I have got to ask you about crossing the English Channel on an inflatable stand-up paddleboard. Can you tell us this story?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was kind of wild. So I think I've always been interested in adventures. I've kind of grown up reading adventure stories, and my friend Jamie, who I met in Chile, we were just talking on Skype one day, and I don't even know how the idea came about, but as soon as one of us said it, we were like, we need to do this. We need to make this happen. And we basically, we trained for kind of, I guess, a few months, which mostly involved kind of learning how not to fall off on these inflatable stand-up paddleboards, which are pretty unstable once you put them into more than like a foot of water. So we raised a lot of money for Charity Water, and we got a support boat, which then at 6 a.m. one morning on the English coastline, kind of guided us across the 21 mile between England and France. And for the majority of it, it was actually, it was relatively pleasant. But there were times when the wind really kicked up, and I don't know, I must have fallen off 25, 30 times. But I'd say the scariest part was just having it's quite a busy shipping highway. And so every kind of 15 minutes, there'd be a giant kilometer long tanker that would kind of loom on the horizon. And I remember one time where the support boat was radioing through to this tanker and saying, watch out for these two British idiots on paddleboards. And the guy in the boat replied in Japanese. So our support boat was like, go, 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 just like paddle as hard as you can. And yeah, it was just a really great day. And we made it across in, I think it was just over 5.5 hours, which was actually a lot quicker than we'd anticipated. And it was good fun. And I love paddleboards, and I'm looking to do another crossing, or probably along a river next time, I think is more appealing. But it's a really wonderfully kind of meditative activity.
That's amazing. And I know you've had a lot of travel adventures over the years, and you've traveled around the world a lot. And I'd love to ask you, just at this point in your life, just a macro question about why you travel. What do you get out of it? What does travel mean to you?
Great question. I think it's really changed a lot over the years. Remembering back to when I was 19 and planning my first trip around the world, I felt like my upbringing had been just quite like narrow in a lot of ways, and I think I just had this really voracious curiosity about other ways of being in the world and other places, and reading National Geographic and watching documentaries. I was just so interested in these places. So I think in the beginning, it was out of this kind of sense of adventure, really. Like it feels like there's nothing more exhilarating than landing in a completely foreign country on your own for the first time, not speaking the language, just getting kind of wonderfully lost in this new place and feeling like you can almost start a new identity if you want. No one there knows who you are. Most of them probably won't see you again. And I think that the lessons from travel there've been so many. I mean, it's often very humbling going to some of these new places. And I think it really does, it's a cliche, but it really does broaden your horizons and expand your perspective. And you start to realize that there are other ways of orienting yourself in the world, which are completely acceptable and fine, but they're just very different to the kind of assumptions that we didn't question growing up. For me, I also fell in love with surfing when I went traveling, and that has been just one of the greatest kind of joys in my life, really. And it's taken me to some places that I don't think I would have been to had it not been for the allure of empty, glassy waves.
And with all of your travels all over the world and all of the places that you've seen, what is it about Bali that brought you back there, and the reason that you made the decision to base yourself there for now?
Yeah, so I think that, again, I was probably brought here for the surfing, the food, and obviously the tropical weather and the cultural beauty. But I think, in all honesty, I've stayed because of the community, the people like Ella and Arthur and Danielle, and people that you've interviewed, and other friends like them who I feel like are kind of an extended family in many ways. So I think being part of a really intentional, creative community here is kind of what feels like home to me. And although it's my base, I probably spend a few months of the year traveling, but being able to come back to this just welcoming and warm family of humans who I really get on with and who challenge me. Yeah, it's really been the people that I've stayed for, I think. And I'm not sure how much longer I'll be here, but certainly most of next year feels right to me.
Awesome. And can you talk a little bit more about MapDia and what that is, what its current form is, and just sort of let people know what the concept was behind MapDia and what they can find there?
Yeah, of course. So MapDia is an online storytelling platform that was for us, inspired by National Geographic, and we wanted to create something that anyone could contribute to. So it's crowdsourced photo stories from all around the world that are tagged to different countries and places. And so you can explore the world through the lens of surfing or food. There were some amazing stories from indigenous tribes around the world. And it's basically this interactive map that allows you to get inspired and learn about the world, and hopefully kind of fuel people's stoke for travel and desire to protect the planet as well.
Awesome. We're going to link that up in the show notes as well. So everything will be in one place. And Johnny, I want to respect your time. I know we have a hard stop today, so I want to move us into the final portion of the interview. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, and appropriately, lightning has just started on this side in Changi. So yeah, there'll be some good sound effects as well.
Amazing.
The lightning round.
What is one book that has significantly influenced you over the years that you'd most recommend people check out?
I think that's a tough one. Probably Waking Up by Sam Harris, because it was one of the things that led to a consistent meditation practice for me. And I then this year became a meditation teacher. And I think I wouldn't have gone down that journey had it not been for reading his book, Waking Up. So I'd thoroughly recommend that to any listeners, particularly those who are skeptical of kind of the Eastern mystical approaches and are looking for a more rational approach to meditation.
Awesome. What is one either productivity tool or an app in any category that you're currently using that you'd most recommend people check out?
I love the tool called Notion that I've been obsessed with recently, and it's basically a note-taking tool. It's replaced Evernote for me, and I have a huge number of kind of online notes that I've been adding to over the years. And for me, Notion just reflects the way that my brain works in a way. And I've just been obsessed with that recently, and I've been doing all of my writing in Notion. So I'd recommend checking that out.
Awesome. If you could have dinner with any person that you've never met, somebody who's currently alive today, so this is actually a possibility in theory, who would you choose to sit down with for a few hours, just you and that person, and why?
I'd probably say Jerry Colonna, who I'd actually one of my dreams for next year would be to interview him on the Curious Humans podcast. But he is a executive coach and kind of previously a VC, but he's one of the most insightful human beings that I've ever come across. And I recently finished reading his book Reboot, and it's just phenomenal. And I thoroughly recommend it to anyone in the startup world. Yeah, I'd probably say Jerry Colonna, although I feel like it would be a challenging conversation. He has a tendency of turning the tables and asking really probing questions.
Well, I'll be sure to listen to that episode if you get him on the podcast. That's awesome. If you could go back in time, knowing everything that you know now in your life, and give one piece of advice to your 18-year-old self, what would you say to 18-year-old Johnny?
Maybe I'm taking this question too literally, but I wouldn't say anything. I think that all of the mistakes that I've made have been instrumental to kind of get me to where I am today. And I feel like if we have any regrets in our life, it's probably because we haven't investigated whatever that experience was and mined it for insights. I really wouldn't give my former self any advice at all, because I might not end up where I am today.
That's fair. That's a completely fair answer. Okay, if you could recommend one content medium that you consume, you mention you listen to a lot of podcasts, or it could be a blog that you read, or YouTube channel or anything. One content medium that you consume that you think people should check out other than your own, what would you recommend?
Huge listener of audiobooks and podcasts these days. Specific podcasts that I've been enjoying are On Being by Krista Tippett, I think is absolutely fantastic. And I've been really engaged in the kind of this, it's called the sense making community or Game B or the intellectual dark web. And there's a series of podcasts from Rebel Wisdom to Future Thinkers to Emerge, which are kind of asking the question of, given that we're going through somewhat of a planetary crisis, what comes next? And how do we kind of navigate this? This sounds funny with the lightning in the background. How do we navigate this really intense time of transition, both kind of personally and collectively? So particularly the sense-making community podcasts and blogs I've been just really interested in lately.
Awesome. We're going to link that up in the show notes as well, so people can just go to one place and check all of these things out. All right. The last two questions are travel questions. First one is, what are the top 3 favorite travel destinations you've ever been to that you'd most recommend people check out?
So I'd say, this is tough. I'd say the first one would be Morocco. Specifically Tagazout, where we lived and worked for 11 months, and I just love the diversity of the culture there, and I just have a real soft spot for it. Number 2 would be Kauai, which is the smallest island in the island chain in Hawaii, and there's a specific trek called the Nepali Coast on the North Shore, which is just absolutely breathtaking and one of my favorite place in the world that I'd love to return to. Third place, I would say, I'd probably say the northeast coast of Scotland, where I used to surf in very cold water in a thick 6mm neoprene wetsuit with a hood and gloves. And there's just something wonderfully remote and nourishing about the coastline there. So those would be my top 3.
Awesome. And what are your top 3 bucket list destinations, places you've never been that are the highest on your list right now you'd most like to see?
Right now, again, these would probably be surfing destinations. The first would probably be, it would have to be Tahiti, just because there's a wave called Chopu there. Yeah, I'd say Tahiti to surf Chopu, which is very intimidating, but very famous wave. Secondly, I think Patagonia, actually. I've only been to Santiago in Chile. I haven't really explored much of South America at all. And that feels like an entire continent that I'd love to spend a good amount of time, and specifically in Patagonia, doing some trekking and looking for empty waves on the western Chilean coastline. Thirdly, probably Antarctica. Mostly because my dad used to work for the British Antarctic Survey, and he's been multiple times, and I never got a chance to go. So I would love to see some of Antarctica at some point. Yeah, those would be my top 3.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Johnny, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. And I want you to let folks know how they can find out about everything you're up to. If they're interested in MapDia, if they're interested in emotional resilience, if they're interested in checking out your podcast, they want to follow you on social media, how can people come into your world and learn about what you're up to?
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much. So the best place is probably my website, which is johnnymiller.co, JONNYMILLER.co. And that's got links to the Curious Humans podcast, to Twitter. People are welcome to reach out and email me with any questions or thoughts, and sign up for the Curious Humans newsletter there as well. This has been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Johnny, for being on the show. This was a really special conversation, so I really appreciate you being here. Good night, everybody.
Be sure to visit the show notes page at themaverickshow.com for direct links to all the books, people, and resources mentioned in this episode. You'll find all that and much more at themaverickshow.com.
Do you want to learn how to travel the world for a year plus with carry-on luggage only and look good while you're doing it? Go to themaverickshow.com/packing to see a free recorded webinar and learn exactly how Matt does it. He shows you the luggage he uses, the specific items he packs, and the travel brands he likes most. Even if you're just looking to go on shorter trips, but pack more efficiently and eliminate your checked luggage, you won't want to miss this. You can watch the free recorded webinar at themaverickshow.com/packing.
Would you like to get Maverick Investor Group's white paper on real estate investing for digital nomads? How to buy U.S. rental properties from anywhere in the world and finance an epic international lifestyle? Just go to themaverickshow.com/nomad. The report